The VNOG online game is an interesting game with an interesting backstory. Before I start my playthrough of the game, I made this little video as a preface to it. Before we discuss the game's history, I should probably discuss its predecessors. The first MNOG online game, also in Flash, was completed by Templar Studios and commissioned for LEGO. The ideas buzzing around the game's story hadn't completely solidified, and the graphics slowly improved over time, but for 2001 standards, the game was impressive, and gave a pretty wide scope of the different Matoran cultures, landmarks, and inhabitants. It was subject to cultural appropriation of the time, but that was more of LEGO's own doing, and they have re-released a proper adaptation in 2006. MNOG bore the giant task of carrying the entire end of 2001's story arc following the cancellation of The Legend of MNOG, and did so successfully, minus a few minor convolutions. It was a game initially made less for plot advancement and more learning about the characters, reading inside jokes, things like that. It successfully served its purpose as a way for people to explore the wonders of MNOG without having to fling blue coconuts at everything while crabs try to drown you out of nowhere. Needless to say, with no other available way of getting the full Year 1 story, MNOG quickly became, and remains, a fan favorite. Templar Studios later gave us the similarly animated Borak and Borak Kal animations of 2002 and 2003, respectively, with its assets more streamlined and set accurate while maintaining the atmosphere of its predecessor. After that was MNOG's sequel, The Final Chronicle, which served as a canonical prequel to The Mask of Light later that year. MNOG 2 was an overly ambitious game, with even wider open spaces to really immerse the player in the island. Unfortunately, it kind of became a bit too much of a Matoran simulator, making you grind for money unless you know the Coley-Ball selling trick, and training the player with slightly repetitious mini-games instead of solely revolving around exploration. Still, it had some nice touches too, albeit few in the cutscene department. They're probably out of steam for those Borak Kal animations. Templar Studios made one final commission for LEGO with its 2004 Vaki animations, evolving their graphical style even further. Though I wish Lecter made some new tracks for the Vaki instead of recycling Hardcastle's killing machines. Perhaps he was unavailable. 2005 came and went, but Templar didn't show up to make any 2005 animations, which were done by Tanuki Design, an independent digital media company founded in Lyon, France, who would continue to work on a majority of the 2006 Flash games, MNOG excluded. It took me a little bit of digging to find them. Like a lot of companies that focus on Flash games, Tanuki unfortunately dissipated in the mid-2010s. Compared to Templar's work, the animations are still pretty cool in a different sense. It's funny how many ways you can give simple Adobe Flash animations artistic appeal. Speaking of which, time to discuss MNOG's development team, Ankama. Similarly to Tanuki Design, Ankama started as a digital media company in Roubaix, France that made their first major game in 2005. Dofus. French Reeps watching may have heard of it. It took the isometric RPG genre and ported it to the world of multiplayer Flash games, set in its own canonical medieval universe, heavily themed around polytheism and the hunt for the titular primordial dofus, dragon eggs. Yep, the game's a literal egg hunt. The game also had heavy open-world exploration themes as well as typical turn-based combat. Like many MMOs at the time, Dofus became extremely popular in France, gaining attention from nearby countries as well, eventually receiving several graphical overhauls and a sequel game, Wakfu, taking place a millennium after the first game in a Mega Man X-styled continuity reboot. While Wakfu cleaned up Dofus' engine to allow more fluid animations and revolved even more heavily around an open-world setting, it suffered from sequel MMO syndrome where players had already invested their time, progress, money, and subscription into the first game, essentially squandering Wakfu's potential to improve. However, to accompany the new story Wakfu delivered was an entire 3-season TV show spin-off. Like the game, the Wakfu TV show is made entirely in Flash and takes place several years after the game's continuity. There are multiple spin-off games branching from that, such as Wakfu the Guardians, but that's a rabbit hole for another time. Pan Pizza's review of the show, focusing particularly on Season 1, is fairly comprehensive, and I've linked it in the description if you feel like giving it a watch. Discretion warning, this is Rebeltaxi we're talking about. Checking the link presumes you are already familiar with his content and style of humor. Season 3 was released as a Netflix exclusive in 2018, but like a lot of other shows, Netflix kind of dropped it due to a lack of views and subjective investment. However, Season 4, as of the recording of this video, has been successfully crowdfunded and is under development. I just hope they find a distributor and stuff. Now this video doesn't age too badly from it being a dumpster fire or something. I completely forgot to mention that Dofus also got its own TV spin-off later on, and respective film, titled Book 1, Julith. Unlike Wakfu, these didn't get localized into English and exist on a different platform. For this reason, I did not feel the incentive to cover them for this video, although I will note that, as per usual, the visuals are stellar. A third video game, taking place yet again long after Wakfu, is also under development. It went by a bunch of names at first: Dofus 3, Wakfu 2, Dofus Cube, Dofus Cubed, but the team eventually agreed on Waven. It's still in the alpha phase, but subjectively looks pretty promising. You can see a clear evolution in art styles between the three games, which really does make them feel like they're from three different historical eras. Oh yeah, Ankama also funded that one movie Mutafukas, or as it got localized in America, MFKZ. A good watch for those into the genre. Being based off a multi-volume graphic novel series, the author Guillaume Renard, who's given full creative freedom over the film, couldn't cram the entire canon into a single movie, instead opting to focus on a more pivotal moment of the series while still mixing external elements. So, with that said, it feels a little wonky in the writing department with lots of underdeveloped characters and themes, but everything else is pretty solid, especially the soundtrack and visuals. To quote my friend Triple R, it would have worked better as a TV show. That way, both the characters and premise that the comic set up could more properly develop over time. And Run agrees with that sentiment, if he was able to make a show instead. So yeah, Ankama's kind of exploded over the years, and I've only really scratched the surface of the company's work following Dofus' success. There's the short-lived PvP-focused Dofus Arena, the Dofus manga series, the Dofus Arena manga series, the respective Wakfu manga series, the Wakfu Arena manga series. I'm joking about that one. Wakfu the Guardians, as I mentioned before, Dofus Pets, Dofus Touch, which is really just a dated mobile port of the main game, mobile minigames to support the Wakfu TV show, Dofus Donjon, which got cancelled and reworked, Cross Mega, Cross Master. They are completely different games, trust me on this one. Crossmaster Arena, Crossmaster Quest, Crossmaster Blast. If I see one more Crossmaster, I'm gonna Mother of Cars! And then there's all the non-Crossmo stuff, like Flyin'. But, yeah, really all over the place. I was kind of bummed that VNOG wasn't mentioned in the Wikipedia page until I put it in there, but in retrospect, there is a ridiculous amount of games and merchandise just left out of the article altogether. Back in 2005, it isn't immediately clear if Dofus boomed instantly upon its release, or if Arena has any implication coming out in 2010, gained a following a little after that, like other MMOs of that era, but either way, LEGO commissioned the company with the intent of making some form of online game for 06. Obviously, if LEGO wanted an exploration-themed game made by Ankama, it was inevitably going to borrow Dofus' engine. And maybe gameplay. A bit. So, several of Dofus' devs went to work on the game, the only one collectively known being Bertrand Atan. He made concept art for Dofus in the past, mostly in gouache, as well as the spin-off graphic novel series Pandala, and was commissioned to draw up several enemies for the game. These eventually included the Gafna, Burnak, Lava Ape, and signature Nektan. Not used for this bird-like model, a Rahi resembling a hermit crab, the scorpion-like Beta Lacan, and the Trick Track, a precursor design to the Burnak. The Burnak was also going to be called a Dolfaru beforehand, the Gopna was called the Radigo, as seen in the game's coding, and the Nektan was called the Paticle. According to Atan, he only worked on enemy designs. He was not responsible for, nor directly involved with any hands-on spriting, coding, or development of the game otherwise. He has mentioned a person nicknamed Curry, but any internet searches under that nickname just trace back to that reply, so specifically what Ankama employees actually worked on the game currently remains a mystery. I'm going to correct a common theorized misconception that these enemies were made for Dofus first and recycled for VNOG. While they do not look particularly Bionicle-like upon first glance, they look even less like Dofus enemies. Dofus is a medieval-themed fantasy world, with most enemies being organic animals and mythical beasts. The Cosmos canon as we know it wouldn't see technological creatures like this until no earlier than 2008. Comparing 2005 enemy concept art to VNOG's concept art, these sketches stick out like a sore thumb. Despite their smooth armored shells, they have clearly defined ball joints and pistons. I don't think it takes a rocket scientist to say that this was simply Atan's first attempt at illustrating custom Rahi designs, though he did unintentionally predict the CCBS visual style. Other sprites for the game were modeled after prototype versions of the actual sets, which weren't available at the time, and most other enemies were derived from the master builder, Casta Rahi. The game was scheduled for fall of 2005, pushed forward to winter of 2005, and was released September 20th, 2006. What happened? To this day, I still don't have a definitive reason for its year-late release. The game has several French-English translation hiccups, unused assets, unused story concepts, recycled songs, character mistakes, references to prototype versions of the sets, elemental confusion, and a general lack of intricate polish. Why would a video game, with clear previous screenshots of completed graphics during its 2005 days, be released a year late and still feel rushed to high heaven? My personal theory, and I will restate that this is just a theory, is that the entire game was finished right on its initial schedule, reliance on 2005 set prototypes and all. But because it primarily stars the Toa and Aika, the game would spoil an entire wave of summer sets half a year before their release instead of hyping up the early winter wave of the 6 Paraka. According to archives of the Ask Greg forums around late 2005, fans had no conceivable idea of what the second wave of canister sets would be, nor were they supposed to. It seems that Greg definitely knew, but information regarding the sets was otherwise primarily airtight at the time. The fans were only teased with the Winter Paraka wave and respective book, though they almost guessed it when Greg said VNOG would star Toa and were aware of Jaller and Company's quest and Island of Doom, putting 2 and 2 together, which really shows how much VNOG almost spoiled in 2005. Greg threw a few curveballs at them with his answers, as he sometimes liked to respond with not untruths to get people to doubt their theories that they guessed accurately a bit too early on. For instance, he said that the Matorum from Voyanui would not become Toa, but that in VNOG the Toa in question would transform on the island. A bit of a paradox, as it was never implied that Jaller and Company would travel there. Just yet. For further reference, Bionicle Heroes also puts the Anika on center stage, and that came out November of 2006, when Anika sets were definitely already out. One intriguing aspect of VNOG is its adherence to the preliminary story bible seen in the 2006 style guide now viewable on BioMedia Project. It heavily explains all the unused plot points and canonical story inconsistencies. To keep with the 2005 deadline, VNOG was using a rough draft of the official Year 6 script, almost beat for beat with a style guide version of it. Well, with a few silly ideas scratched out. You can check the cutting room floor for a lot of info on this game, especially all the unused stuff. I sometimes wondered if they were being reliable by saying that Ankama even worked on it, since there were no other sources I could find of Ankama acknowledging development of the game. But a quick look at Bertrand Daton's portfolio proved me wrong. There are the logos and everything. Unfortunately, there are virtually no other sources of the game itself other than the ones I've mentioned. The few I did find just trace back to the official Wikipedia page, which was stuff I wrote in. Most fans pan the game as a major outlier in the online game trilogy, I guess you could call it. And the game itself has kind of been lost to obscurity, even with BioMedia Project normalizing its accessibility again. I guess the reason I'm so fascinated by VNOG is that it's a mess of a game. Yet for every flaw, oversight, imperfection, and unused feature, there is a commendable amount of creativity and improvisation with materials the dev team had to work with. The game has intricate details in its own right, you just need to know where to look. I'd say its biggest flaw would simply be the tedium of fetch questing. Dofus itself had teleportation devices called zaps that would carry over into every following game, and VNOG could have benefited greatly from having at least 1 or 2 of these things lying around. Then maybe players wouldn't be tempted to constantly type in move 180 every time they completed a task for Garen. The easiest way to find all the game's unused content is by activating the game's infamous debugging system that can be opened by pressing Ctrl', leading to the aforementioned wide array of cheat codes and potential to make the game piss easy. However, this playthrough will show you all the ins and outs of the game and how to play it legit. So let's go!